to Katarina. And last but not least, we're going to say hello to Suzanne. All right. I'm going to ask to unmute all of you so you will get a notification. Danny, you should be unmuted, and Molly, you should also be unmuted. All right, I think everyone's ready.
Thank you. Am I good to share my screen, Greer?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any indication that you can see my screen? A
Yep,
nod, a
you're all
thumbs
good.
up.
Yes, we
Perfect. Thank
can.
you. Awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Um, I think I speak on behalf of all of us here. We are so excited to be here today and join the Rethinkability Summit. Thank you, Greer. Thank you, Jessica, and the team for the invitation and for putting on such a spectacular event. My name is Molly Denon. I am the founder of Infinitus Learning. I am a white woman. I have long brown and gray hair. I'm wearing a black shirt with a denim button down, and I am sitting in front of a virtual book nook with some green foliage in the background. I use she, her pronouns, and I am thrilled to be in conversation with all of you today. So we built this session around a very simple yet very powerful idea. The idea that word shapes culture and culture shapes belonging. So language does a lot more than simply describe the world. It defines who belongs in it and who doesn't. Language has the ability to quietly open doors as well as close them. My personal favorite thing about language, and just in case you're interested, I was a linguistics major as an undergrad, so this has followed me into my professional life. But my favorite thing about language is that it is a living and breathing organism, meaning it molds, it adapts, it evolves, and it is a constant reflection of us, and we are a constant reflection of it. We often think about language as a tool of communication, but it is also a force of culture. The way that we talk reflects the way that we think, and the way that we think reflects who gets included, who gets overlooked, and who feels seen. So today we are going to take a look at how language shows up most specifically in work. The small shifts that create big impact, the barriers that make change hard, and the actions that help turn awareness into something long-lasting. I am joined here today by three phenomenal panelists who live and breathe this work in different and unique ways. I would love for each of them to introduce themselves and tell you about all the fantastic work that they do. So let us get started with Katarina.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here today. I'm Catarina Rivera, pronouns she, her. I am a light-skinned Latina woman with dark brown wavy hair worn up. I'm wearing a forest green top, silver dangly earrings, and behind me is a white wall with a wood furniture piece. And I'm a public speaker, DEIA consultant, and content creator on disability. My personal lived experience is with deaf blindness due to Usher syndrome. And so I have been disabled my whole life, deaf since birth, blind since I found out about it at 17. And I've been on a journey with that I'm looking forward to sharing today. And I'm hearing some background noise. So if you're transmitting that, please mute your microphone. Yeah, and my platform on Instagram is called Blindish Latina.
Thank you, Katarina. Next, we will have Dani introduce herself.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Dani Herrera. My pronouns are she and her in English and ella in Spanish. I am wearing a cream beige like top, and I am sitting right in front of a very large um, library piece of furniture of sorts with tons of books and tons of pop culture toys, if you may. And I also wanted to note that I'm running a little bit of a fever, so please bear with me. And the work that I do, I am a talent, culture, and DEI consultant, and I've been doing this work for about 20 years.
Thank you, Dania. I'm so sorry to hear you're not feeling well. If you need anything, just let us know.
I will let you all know. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Suzanne. Would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Happy to be here today. My name is Suzanne Wertheim. I am a former professor of linguistics and linguistic anthropology. Since 2011, I've been using social science, mostly linguistics and linguistic anthropology, but some other stuff too, to research and improve workplace communication. So, Molly, everything you said, I was like, yes. To describe myself, I am a olive-skinned. In 2030, I will be counted as MENA, Middle Eastern North African. So I no longer have to write other and put in Semitic. So I'm very excited about that. With long, also dark and gray hair, I'm wearing very dramatic glasses that are multicolored and very geometric. And I've got on a black shirt with wavy cream stuff, a creamy colored cardigan, a big kind of a mini breastplate, maroon necklace, and I've blurred my background because I can't figure out how to get my light currently to not shine out of my very cool samurai uh, woodblock, Japanese woodblock behind me. So
Awesome. Thank you so much, Suzanne. And thank you, the three of you. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you all. And I think we're all very excited to hear your perspectives. Um, so before we jump into some of the questions for our panelists, I think we thought it important to ground ourselves in what it is we're trying to achieve here today. I heard someone say this in just the session before. We're really looking for actionable, practice-oriented. We really want you to be able to take away some insights that you can implement in your work as quickly as today. Um, so we have our objectives here. They have been divided into two groups, input and output. The input are objectives that help us expand our thinking. So we're thinking illuminate the role of language in inclusion and building awareness of language as a cultural force. The output are objectives that help us put these new ideas into practice. So for today, that means learning from real world application, which we will hear more about from our panelists. And at the end, we will ask you to commit to an action beyond this session. Um, so again, in other words, we're not just here to talk about inclusive language, we're here to understand it, to challenge it, and to think about what we can actually do differently after we leave. So with that, I think it's time for us to get started. And to do that, we would love first to hear from all of you. We ask that you think of one phrase you've heard of at work that made you pause. And this pause might be something that felt exclusive, dismissive, something that made you stop and think, something that felt really good, something that felt really bad. That thing will be different for everyone. But we would love for you to write those and send them in the chat if you are inclined to share. I will read some of them um, as they come in. Oh, at least he is high functioning. The weather is being bipolar. Think about the impact you have on others. The blind leading the blind. Ladies, guys, drunk. Um, we are all just a little autistic. Always referring to everyone as guys. I'm so OCD. These are fantastic examples. Thank you all very much. Blind spot, amazing. I caught myself this morning saying walking away from this meeting again. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you all for sharing those. We would like you to feel free to keep adding those into the chat if others come along as we are listening. But we will also ask you to come back to these towards the end of the session. All right. So, our fantastic panelists, it's time to hear from you. And I think the best place to start sometimes is at the beginning. So, I will ask each of you to share perhaps the moment that you realized language held power, or perhaps something that inspired you to pursue this work. Dani, would love to start with you.
Yeah, would love to share. My story is not necessarily tied to language that relates to disability, but it does tie back to inclusive language. So, imagine tiny, teeny Danny. I was about 9 years old, and my mom had just died. She passed away from an chronic disease. Sorry, like my words escape me today. And I was still going to school, and I was doing my English as a second language homework, and we had to answer some very common questions. And one of the questions was, where does your mother live, and what does she does for work? And I couldn't answer those questions, right? And the reason behind it was not that I didn't necessarily know how to answer those questions. Like grammatically, I knew how to do that, but I didn't know how to answer the question. And I also didn't want my teacher to know. It was a very vulnerable and kind of tricky situation for me. So I didn't answer. And what happened afterwards was that my teacher called me and my dad to have a discussion about it, because she knew that I had the knowledge on how to answer the question. So that's when I had to let her know that my mom had just died, just like maybe a week ago. And that wasn't a comfortable conversation. And that was actually the moment that I realized that I wish that she would have asked about my parents, or that she would have used completely different language that wasn't necessarily about my mom, right? Um, and I know that that sounds, like silly, because I was very little at that time, but I still think about that moment. And I actually was thinking about that moment when I started to study linguistics as well, when I was studying to be a teacher of English, and I started literary translation as well. So that was my story.
Thank you so much for sharing, Danny. And I don't think anybody here would tell you that that sounds silly at all. In fact, it seems like it was so impactful that it's brought you to
Yeah.
this panel. So thank you so much for sharing. Katarina, we would love to hear perhaps your origin story.
Thank you. Yeah, so this story is really about what drew me to this work on disability. I shared earlier that I have been disabled since birth. However, I didn't do anything with disability in my career until much later in life. I worked in education as a classroom teacher. I worked in public health and the nonprofit sector. And I was working with the Latino community often, so I was really tapping into that part of my identity, but I wasn't doing anything with disability. And the reason for that, I think, was just that I was on my journey. I think a lot of people can relate to this. When I was first diagnosed with blindness at 17, it was super shocking. I didn't know a lot about blindness. All I really knew was what I saw in the media, and it was a very negative portrayal of blindness being limiting. But as I went through my journey and received services, learned eventually how to use a white cane, learned about accessible technology, accessibility in general, connected to other Blind people, stopped driving on my own terms when I moved to New York City, and really just found more of a community. I totally shifted the way that I thought about my disability. In the beginning, it was a lot more shameful with a lot of fear. But using a white cane changed everything. It opened up conversations, and I started speaking about my disability openly to people. I was apparently disabled instead of non apparently. And I found a strong voice in myself I found that advocating for my needs made my life better, and it was a complete change in my everyday experience. So I felt super powerful, and that's why now I decided to use my voice in a public way to say, okay, how can I educate others? How can I take the 13 years of my life that it took me to say, okay, I'm going to use a cane, I'm really going to own being blind, to now do something for the world to make it more inclusive, to make workplaces more inclusive. So that's my little origin story.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Katarina. And of course, Suzanne, would you tell us your origin story?
Sure. I'm going to tell, having heard these two, I'm going to tell two brief origin stories. So the first is actually not even a midpoint, but a late point, which is my entry into really thinking about language and disability and really having a focus on it. And so, um, because I've been working on language and linguistics since 1995, right? But I hadn't really thought that specifically about disability until I started running inclusive language audits for companies, right? That's one of the things I do is I go audit materials. So websites, press releases, marketing materials, employee handbooks, blogs. And I don't know why, but well, I guess I do know why, because disabled people are so often marginalized and erased and forgotten. I could not believe how many problems with disability I found in my audits. Like the quantity and the consistency was genuinely shocking to me. I knew to expect things about race, gender, sexual orientation, but the absolute erasure, the ableist language, writing as if members of your audience were not themselves disabled, right? Imagine if, I mean, I'm like, but you don't have to imagine if you are blind and accessing this text, right? It was really shocking to me. And how frequently disabled people were presumed incompetent. I came in understanding that people would look at people of color and women, and particularly women of color, and presume that they were incompetent. But I hadn't realized how just being in a wheelchair and being an upper middle class white man who's a lawyer in a wheelchair, just the fact of being a wheelchair user could negate every other aspect of privilege in terms of how people treated you. So that's my origin story in terms of being more intentional about focusing on and writing about language and disability. My origin story for for studying language is I've come to realize, especially researching my book, in the intro to my book, I say I'm neurotypical-ish. I think that I would just change that and put me elsewhere in the spectrum now. In particular, I was very hyperlexic, and so I skipped kindergarten, right? Because I was so advanced in certain, which I now understand is so common for autistic people to be reading it too. I'm like, oh, there's a lot of stuff that's been falling into place as I research neurodivergent people and their communication styles. I'm like, this feels very personal. So I remember being 5 years old and my first day of first grade, and everybody else knew people from kindergarten, and I didn't know them. I'd been to preschool, but I mostly sat in the corner and read because I was very shy. And I looked around me and I was like, there are rules for communication, and I don't know what they are. People are understanding how to interact with each other, and I don't know what they are. And I had better freaking study these. I probably was cursing because I was in New York. I had better freaking study these so I learn. And so that really is my origin story as a scholar of linguistics and linguistic anthropology, is being 5 and looking and being like, there are rules and I don't know them. So
Amazing. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Um, and I think we all can agree we are sitting at a wonderful intersection between lived experience, language, culture, the work experience. And I'm really excited to dive in with all of you. Um, so after hearing all of your origin stories, and some of the examples that we've seen from our audience here today, that brings us sort of to this concept that change is very hard, right? So much of our language is embedded practice, cultural norms. It sort of brings out all of the good and bad. Change is hard. Breaking pattern is really difficult. Um, Becoming aware of these patterns that are harmful to some can be challenging. So I would like to ask all of us to reflect on what is it that we think makes changing language so difficult? Are there cultural or systemic factors that tend to hold people and also organizations back from change? Um, I would love this to be conversational and organic. Um, so I will ask Suzanne, since I've asked you last, I want you to go first this time to get us kicked off. And among all of us, please feel free to call on who you'd like to go next, or again, sort of no pressure, and we can
Okay.
just move
I was a
through.
professor for so long, I'm perfectly happy to tell people when to talk. Come on. Uh,
Amazing, perfect.
all right. So I'm so glad that, Molly, you started us off by saying that language is very multifunctional. And I have to say that it not only reflects the way that we think about the world, but the feedback from language shapes our mental models. And I want to start with something that's a little bit subtle, but I think it's interesting. Because we're going to talk about, and when we think about, and some of it came up, ableist language, a lot of it deals with blindness or deafness, right? Being low vision or being hard of hearing. And I want to point out that there is a very motivated linguistic reason for that, and that is the human use of what we call conceptual metaphor to understand the world around us, because the world is incredibly complicated, and we're always constructing these mental models of the world. Honestly, from in utero, if you're hearing, you're already learning things about the patterns of the languages being spoken around you, right? So there are these conceptual metaphors where we say, oh, this thing is like that thing. Oh, this thing is like that thing. And that they organize how we see the world. So the world becomes less complicated because we map one thing onto another. Well, two conceptual metaphors that we have in language after language after language is that seeing something is understanding it, and that hearing something is paying attention to it or perceiving it. And these conceptual metaphors are just fill the English language and fill many other languages. So examples are things like, I see what you mean, for seeing is understanding, or it's not clear to me, or I can't visualize it, right? Or their words fell on deaf ears, for hearing is perceiving, right? Or I don't feel heard, or I need you to listen to me. All of those are really about perceiving or paying attention. Because these are so incredibly pervasive and very basic mental models, it makes sense that we have these phrases that we hear on this call understand to be ableist: fell on deaf ears, blind to, blind spot, tone deaf. And so it takes some time to explain to people and unpack the ableism. And so I just want to have people maybe feel empowered to say, let's separate out. I always say to people, maybe get more granular. Are we actually talking about vision and hearing, or are we talking about perception and paying attention? Because these metaphors say, to be blind is to not pay attention. To be deaf is to not pay attention. To be blind is to not think through consequences. To be deaf is to not care or be insensitive. And what we want to do is separate those out and say there's no correlation between a physical disability and bad behavior, right? So if it's bad behavior that you want to call out, you can find other words that don't rely on that mapping, which is a distortion and inaccurate. And because of what I was just talking about, I'd like to hand it over to Katarina.
Thank you. Yes. So I think in terms of going back to why change is so hard, it's really important to just say, like, something that I observe over and over again in my speaking engagements is that people are still uncomfortable talking about disability. And this could be because they don't feel they have personal experience with it. So a lack of familiarity, and that can come from the non-disabled perspective. I'm also observing a generational difference. People who are coming from older generations have often been taught not to talk about disability, or that it's rude. And there is um, a deep discomfort with the topic. So a lot of what we have to do with this conversation is have people understand that it's okay to use the word disability. There's nothing wrong with it. And in fact, there's a powerful identity that we can connect to. So there's a lot to unpack there in terms of also disabled people ourselves. We're dealing with internalized ableism, shame, and really oftentimes just not having a lot of exposure to disability pride until later on in our journey. And so I love that there are so many creators on social media really sharing about their experience and creating a community that we didn't have before. Another thing that I will say for organizations is that the fact that in the workplace, only 21% of disabled employees disclose their disabilities can make organizations feel like they don't have a lot of disabled employees, that it's not a priority to work on disability inclusion. And of course, this is not accurate because up to 80% of disabilities are not apparent. Even myself saying, okay, yes, I'm deafblind. I'm wearing glasses right now. I put away my cane when I sit down at a restaurant, for example. People often don't observe my hearing aids. So my disability can be completely not apparent as well if I'm sitting in a restaurant. So it's a real thing that's going on. But we are the largest marginalized group. And there are so many people that are disabled, even if they're not identifying as disabled, and even if they're not diagnosed yet. And there's a lot of fear with getting it wrong that stops organizations and leaders from even trying. And so I think we all need to be okay with transparency about our learning journeys, the messiness of creating change in this area and giving feedback, messing up. So I love to give the example of if you said something that doesn't sound quite right, it's totally okay to pause and model for everyone else in the space. Oh, I don't like how I phrased that. I'm going to make a change and say it again in a different, more inclusive way. So, an example we saw in the chat, someone saying, oh, what's everyone going to walk away from this meeting with? If you say that, you can say, oh, I actually don't want to use that verb here. I'm going to say, what is everyone going to leave this space with? And that's a great model to show that you can make a change right then and there. I'll pass it on now to Dani.
Thank you, Katarina. Very quickly, going back to why change is hard, and I want to focus on companies and organizations because it's where most of my experience lies. There are two things that I see happen a lot. And one of them is, as we were just talking about, is the lack of awareness, right? Like some companies and people, professionals, they don't even know that this is something that they should be paying attention to. There could be a million reasons why that might be the case, a conversation for another day, but also a lack of understanding on why that's important. Every time that I try to approach these conversations with different organizations or different people, professionals, every time that I mention inclusive language or plain language, the very first thing that they think about is gender inclusion and potentially maybe race sometimes, but disability is not a topic that they're even thinking about. So whenever I bring back this topic and I try to explain, okay, as Katarina was saying, let's focus on exactly what is it that we want to say. Let's break it down and let's try to use plain language. Again, disability is not a topic that they're even thinking about. So that's one thing which actually makes change a little bit harder, especially in corporate settings. And then the other thing that I notice quite a lot is that even whenever we talk about inclusive communications, most of us, especially in the people and talent space, we are thinking about communication in writing or communication verbally, right? We are not paying attention to some of the images that we are sharing. We are not paying attention to how, when, and what type of documents we are sharing. Are they accessible? Are we sharing a PDF document that can be actually accessed through a screen reader. And that is a sort of conversation that unfortunately I don't think many companies or many people, professionals, are having. And that adds to why this change is actually hard. We are not doing the things that we are supposed to be doing. So passing it on back to you, Molly.
Thank you. Um, and that's the thing about change. It is incredibly hard, but it's also possible. We spent some time naming some of the barriers, the many challenges that we face, especially in the workplace, to addressing language, its direct impact on culture and the way that people feel at work and show up at work. And I would like to ask all of you, what are in your work, what are some of the strategies or some of the wins that you've helped move people or organizations from intention, good intention, the desire to create more equitable, inclusive spaces? What have you used to take them from intention to long-lasting change? Um, I will start maybe with Katarina this time.
I had a feeling. I knew you were going to say my name. Okay. So let's talk about some best practices. There's so much that you can do. I will say that from the way that I work with my clients, I'm often coming in as a one-time speaker, getting the conversation started. And I don't often have that opportunity to be the person seeing the long-term change happen. But the advice that I give is make accessibility plans mandatory. Do something simple like that so that any initiative for employees, for product development, whatever it is, that people have to figure out how to include accessibility in that initiative. That is mandatory. The first efforts probably won't be complete, but the journey will start. Another best practice that I think is really important for moving from awareness to action is to include multiple aspects to your action. A lot of people focus on education, building awareness, training. That is really important. And oftentimes, training is not even effective or inclusive in the way that it's delivered. So I think we need to improve training, and we need to create simple language guidelines. I think this is another practice that organizations can use, especially when it comes to disability. If there is a document with internal language guidelines that you are educating everyone on using, for example, person first, identity first language. As an organization, if you've made a decision on what you are going to use and why, but then offer room for everyone to self identify in the way that works for them, that will help people feel more confident in their communications. It's also, there's a lot of terms that are confusing. So providing clarity, for example, on when to use neurodiversity, when to say neurodivergent, and giving some examples will also help people. So ultimately, language, I believe, is an entry point to opening up deeper conversations about what's underneath language, like ableism, attitudes about disability, how people feel about it. And language is just the beginning. And I'll pass it back to you, Molly.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Katarina. Um, I will shoot over to Suzanne.
Your equitable distribution meant I knew I was next. So I've been 3, I've been 1. It was time to be 2. All right, so I'm going to piggyback on what Katarina was saying, and say that the more that there are tools that are in place that are good tools and are well distributed so people can take advantage of them, the more you can prevent problematic language in planned communications, right? So it's not the things that happen in everyday communications and meetings and Slack channels, but sort of planned things, right? So the three things that I've developed for clients, and I put two of them in my book to be distributed, but if people have an audience checklist, right? So you can go through and make sure you haven't forgotten about people who are going to be in your audience. That's the first one. And I think of all three of these as like a pilot with a clipboard going around the plane before it takes off, before your communications take off. If you go through these safety checklists, you can make sure that you don't have a damaged wing or whatever before you take off, right? So, an audience checklist, a glossary for terminology, like when is it neurodiverse? When is it neurodivergent? We want to say wheelchair user and not wheelchair bound. We don't want to say suffering with, suffering from, all of those things. And then I would say a quick reference list of suggested substitutions, right? So people can just go. So the checklist and the substitutions I put at the end of my book. So people could just look and be like, I feel like tone deaf isn't right. And then they look and they're like, oh, okay, sure. Here's what I use instead. And for the checklist, I wrote down just to tell you the kinds of things that you can look at, right? So I pulled out from my book. So as you're writing something or editing something, you can think about what are the physical abilities and disabilities of the people in my audience. So this goes right to accessibility and also thinking through what other perspectives are. Will my communications be accessible to people who are deaf or hard of hearing, blind or low vision? For events, are my communications giving an accurate representation of the physical accessibility of the space and event? This is something I have learned from following disability activists, how infrequently especially pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, how infrequently you actually have an accurate assessment of how it will be to get there and if you can even get in. And am I avoiding erasing anyone in the disabled community and remembering pain points? Am I going to avoid using language that upsets them? And I'm going to say one more thing and then hand it over. And that is people talk about pronouns a lot when it comes to inclusive language, but they don't talk about the pronouns that I think are sliding under the radar a lot, which is we, you, and us, where people will talk about we or you or use imperatives where there's an implied you. And they're completely forgetting about people with disabilities in that. So when I'm on retainer for some companies and I review articles before they come out. And when an abled person will write about, for example, a blind client in some accessibility stuff, I pulled stuff from this too, just so I didn't forget. So they write things like, take a look at this screenshot of the website. That's a lot of information to take in. Now imagine buying a stock for the first time, but doing it with your eyes closed. And I had to be like, there are blind and and blind and low vision people in your audience who will be accessing this through a screen reader. You can't write as if it's an abled person talking to an abled person. And so the we and you and imperatives, I encourage people to take a look and make sure that they're not writing as if it's able to abled and forgetting about the fact that your audience is actually much larger.
Amazing. Danny.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna add on onto everything that Dr. Suzanne and Katarina were talking about. So we talked about putting together a checklist and having an understanding of what language we are going to be using and when and how. And I actually like to focus on the how because, again, I come from systemic and operations backgrounds and I work with the talent and HR people. So I want to help them actually make all of these things a reality, right? So one of the things that I like doing is whatever process or project we are working on, I like to break it down into very bite-sized steps and try to understand how can I embed all of the things that Dr. Suzanne was talking about and Katarina was talking about, and how I can make them easy to use, right? So for example, if we are putting together a checklist of words that we are going to be avoiding, right? We're going to be using that. So an example could potentially be an interview, right? So we can make sure that interviewers and hiring managers have access to that checklist and that they review it before interviewing a candidate so they're not using ableist language with a candidate. Or again, if we are having a meeting as the one that we are having right now, or we are interviewing someone and we know that there might be some biases taking place, we can use a Zoom background as the one you, Molly, and Katarina are using, just to make sure that we are focusing on the other person when we are having a conversation. So we are not getting distracted by all of the things that I have in my background. But even when doing that, we want to double click and we want to make sure that whatever solution we are offering is actually applicable and helpful for that situation, right? Because maybe a blurry background could be amazing in the conversation that we are having. But if we are having a conversation with someone who speaks ASL, maybe some of the sign languages are getting lost in the blurry background, right? So what I would suggest doing again is break down every single piece of communication that you're having, either in writing, verbally, a meeting, a huge event that you are running, and try to break it down into tiny steps and see where can I, where can we embed all of the things that Suzanne and Katarina taught us already, so we can make the process equitable and inclusive without having to put the burden on the other person. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
This is incredible. I'm having so much fun and am learning so much. And I hope our audience is too. And actually, it brings us, we are back to you, audience. Time to do some more reflection. We asked you at the beginning of this session to think about a phrase that has made you pause at some point. We've talked through some of the barriers and challenges. We've heard some amazing tips and very actionable insights of things that we can all do to change language, to challenge the status quo. So it's that commitment time. What is one phrase you'll rethink after today, or one thing you might do to help your organization, to help the people around you navigate through some of these changes? And again, feel free to throw these into, I don't like the way that I said that. Feel free to add these into the chat, um, and we can take a look at some of them. Walk away with, that's a big one. Walk through for demonstrations or instructions. Walk away from this meeting. Don't forget about people who lip read. Um, some amazing neurodiverse versus neurodivergent. Look at this, walk away from this. Weekly stand-ups, amazing. Our ask of all of you is to take what you've learned here today uh, and help us create small changes, small victories that will make big impact in the places where we work, the places we live, in our communities, etc. We have put together some resources for all of you. We ask that you scan this QR code if you are so inclined. There are lots of articles, tools, guides, etc., that are in this document. More will be added, so please feel free to come back to it, visit it often. Um, Sorry, just reading some things from the chat. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to Greer or to Jessica. They can, link us back to us, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have. So as we are wrapping up, I will ask if any of our panelists, Dani, Katarina, Suzanne, if you have any final comments that you would like to leave the audience with here today. No? Okay, excellent. So, Katarina, yes.
Yes, just a reminder that I said earlier that because I have a hearing disability, I will never jump in. So if this is not a lived experience that you connect to, then just letting you know that, because I have sometimes talked over someone else without meaning to. So that's why I use the little raise hand button. So I just want to say that I hope that all of you connect to community. Conversations about language can be very charged, especially online. And I've experienced that as a creator. Every time that I share tips on language, I'll receive a lot of pushback. And unfortunately, sometimes it comes from the disability community. And there are some people who say, oh, well, I'm not offended by this. So they're trying to invalidate the tips or the language changes. And I think it's really important to recognize that if you don't have to be personally offended by it for it to be offensive. And let's engage in community care. If language is offensive to some people, let's do our best to address it and make those changes. So thank you.
Thank you so much. As we wrap up, I would like to thank Katarina, Dani, Suzanne, for all of your thoughtful insights, for your engaging questions, tips, everything you've shared with us. And thank you to all of you for engaging so deeply in this conversation. You have been a wonderful audience, giving us food for thought. And we would love, I think, to continue this conversation with all of you on LinkedIn, on Slack, on all of the different spaces in which we are in community. Our final call to action is simple but powerful. Rethink, reframe, rebuild. If we come back to the idea from the beginning of this session that language is a living and breathing organism, progress doesn't start and it doesn't end. It is a constant evolution that we are learning and working towards together. So when we say rethink, we invite you to rethink the everyday language that we use, to pause before defaulting, like Katarina mentioned, modeling for those who you're speaking with. You don't like the way that you said something, and so rephrasing, rethinking that. Reframe how we talk about ability, inclusion, and difference. Moving from language that labels or limits to language that invites and connects. And rebuild the systems and cultures around us so inclusive language isn't just a personal choice, but a shared norm woven into how we lead, hire, teach, collaborate, communicate. Changing language is often the first visible sign of deeper transformation. It's how we begin to make belonging real. So thank you to all of you again, to our wonderful panelists, to Greer, to Jessica, for this fantastic Rethink Ability Summit. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to turn on just a little music.